10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 119. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 119 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Hope you are well. Hope you've had a great week so far and hope you're ready to get into it. Learn something new today. I'm really excited to bring you this episode on the great Louis Armstrong. Before we get into today's episode, let's clean up a couple of things, a couple of housekeeping items. If you want to get the PDF to this episode and every single other episode that we've ever done, head over to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, and follow the links to go over to our Patreon site. And if you choose to become a supporter at only $3 a month, you get every single thing that we've ever done. And that, at this point, is a lot of material. And if you are somebody that is already supporting us, thank you so much. I'm sorry you have to listen to me talk about this every week. But if you're not somebody who supports us and you've got an extra $3 a month lying around and you like the podcast, that is a great thing to do. We are a listener-supported show. All of our support to keep these episodes coming at you comes from people like you. So if you'd like to get all of that fantastic material, like I said, head over to 10minutejazzlesson.com. Follow the links to Patreon. You can get yourself signed up and you'll have access to everything that we are doing over there. So let me give a shout out to the couple of people that have signed up for Patreon this week. Just a note, I am doing this episode really early because when you're hearing this, I'm actually going to be on vacation for a week, which is going to be amazing. So if I missed your name, I'm sorry. I will catch up, but I wanted to give a big shout out to Stacy and Nolan for signing up to be Patreon supporters this week. Thank you guys so much. We appreciate it. If you've also got 2 seconds to go over and leave us a rating and review on iTunes, that also helps us a ton. Get out to more people just like you. Okay, enough about that. Let's get into today's episode. So today we're going to be talking about one of the greatest, if not the greatest, jazz musician that has ever lived, and that is Louis Armstrong. Now, let's talk about something before we actually get into this. I think a lot of us, we sort of maybe discount Louis or don't listen to him enough because we are quote-unquote into modern jazz. But what you have to understand is that the music that he was playing at the time was extremely modern. And he was really the architect of so much of the stuff that came after him. So one problem is we're bombarded with so much music from, let's say 1940 and after, that we feel like we can't keep up with it. And of course, most of us want that more modern sound into our playing. So, sometimes we only reach back as far as bebop, right? But we definitely need to reach back further and understand where all these bebop musicians came from. And I talked about this a little bit on the Monday Motivation podcast about, learning some of the tunes from way back in the day. Now we need to look at some of the players from way back in the day, and they can really teach us a lot. They can really teach us a lot about playing as a modern player, and we can use some of their aesthetic and put it into the music that we're playing, almost 100 years after they were playing their music. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at this just masterful Louis Armstrong excerpt from his solo on his tune Hotter Than That, which I think is one of the hippest tunes I've ever heard in my entire life. If you haven't checked out any of like the Hot 5, Hot 7 recordings, or really just any of Louis' catalog, you really owe it to yourself to go back and check that stuff out. I mean, his music was just filled with so much life. And if you think about this is a guy that was playing, in the 1920s, and you listen to the stuff that he was playing, he was so far ahead of his time. It wasn't even funny. Not to mention that, when he was around, jazz was actually popular music. And obviously it hasn't been that way since. We think of pop and we think of something completely different than jazz. But Yeah, it's just not, I can't say enough about Louis Armstrong and that music. I definitely used to be somebody that ignored it. And throughout the years, I've really, really grown to love it. And it has taught me so much about being a complete musician. So, the real point to why I'm bringing you this week is that Hotter Than That is just a couple of chords. Again, like we talked about on Monday, it's a really, really simple structure, but it's so impactful. So when you're playing over this music, you have to learn how to make one chord really, really interesting. And I think that nobody does it like Louis Armstrong. So let me start by actually playing you the excerpt. And you're going to hear a play along that's also going to be included with this week's episode of Hotter Than That, in kind of the style of which we're studying. So that would be great. You can get the PDF and you can also get the play along to actually work on this stuff after. Well, let me play this. This is just going to be, a little, I think it's 14 bar excerpt of his solo, so that you can hear really what's going on, before we talk about, the stuff I want you to take away from this episode. So here's the excerpt. So obviously my playing doesn't even come close to Louis Armstrong's. I play a completely different instrument, obviously, and also I'll just never be as good as Louis, but that's just a way of demonstrating the actual excerpt to you. So if you look at your PDF from this week, this is actually in the key of B flat. So it's in the key that Louis played it. And I always like to present transcriptions that way so that you can see exactly what the person was playing on the horn or on their instrument. So just know that this is not in concert pitch. This is in B flat. So we see an F chord, just a plain old F chord. I imagine that the rhythm section might have been putting some sixths in there. That was a very, very popular chord. They didn't use as many major sevens back then. It was mostly like six chords or triads or something like that. So we see that the first six measures of the solo is just over an F chord. And then you'll notice that in measure 7, we switch to a C7 chord. So just 1 and dominant 5. And then that C7 chord actually stays for 8 more measures. So what we're going to look at is how did Louis make this interesting, just playing over 2 chords, and it's some of the most dynamic playing that I've ever heard. So the first thing is his rhythmic concept. I mean, his rhythmic concept is so far beyond what I even hear a lot of musicians doing today. I think that he was so far ahead of his time on rhythm that it just made people go crazy. Other musicians and people who weren't musicians that were just listening to him play. It was such a dynamic sound with all of this syncopation and all of these different articulations that anybody had ever heard before. And trumpet is such a great instrument for being dynamic and really working on your articulation that it just came across as just the most exciting music that anybody has ever heard, right? And he also keeps it fairly diatonic. So if you look at the first 6 measures, the only notes he plays outside of a regular F major scale is the flat third leading into the major third. So he does a chromatic approach, and that gets a little bit of the sound of the blues in there, and it also gives us a little bit of interesting stuff going on outside of the key. So the first 6 measures, I mean, they're awesome, awesome, awesome. You're going to have to take a while and figure out what makes them so awesome, besides the couple of things that we just talked about. Main thing is obviously the rhythm. Really, really study what Louis is doing with the rhythm there. And then find out how he's using that chromatic approach tone to the third there. Okay, so now we go to the 5 chord. What's he doing over the 5 chord? Well, again, the rhythm is amazing, and he starts to introduce triplets. He starts to introduce both quarter note triplets and eighth note triplets. So he's kind of evolving his rhythmic concept as it goes along, which is also pretty amazing. And again, He's not really playing anything outside of the key, save for a couple of chromatic approach tones. He plays a sharp 11 in one of the measures. This is in measure 9 of your example. He plays a sharp 11, but really what he's doing is he's surrounding the fifth. So he's definitely not thinking about it as a sharp 11. And then in measure 10, he uses a flat 9, but again, he's not thinking about it as a flat 9. He's thinking about it as a chromatic approach to the natural 9, and that's about it. Those are really the only notes that he uses outside of the key. So I think that Louis can really teach us something about restraint, right? And doing more with less. I think that's one of his huge accomplishments as a musician, is that he didn't need all these crazy chord substitutions. He didn't need to build all this tension using harmonic structures. He built tension and built interest using his rhythmic concept, his sound. I mean, that was really it. When you just heard his sound, it was unbelievable. He didn't need to even do anything but play one note, and that sound would get you excited to listen to him. So it really is kind of an exercise in restraint. And I think if you start studying, musicians like Louis Armstrong, Sidney Bechet, guys from that era where they weren't going crazy off the rails in terms of these super complicated harmonic structures, you can really learn a lot without making your head spin, as they say. So I think this would be a really great solo to study. Check out what he's doing over just 2 chords, and then maybe practice a little bit over Hotter Than That and see if you can actually come up with a really interesting solo that is indicative of the period that this tune would have been played in. So you can't be playing bebop over it. You would have actually been kicked off the bandstand if you were doing that. See what you can do. Can you make it interesting without getting into the uber complicated? All right, so try that out this week. Let me know how it goes. I'm going to also include a play along for Hotter Than That this week in kind of that old school style. So if you want to take the Louis transcription and kind of learn the melody and practice soloing over it, I think that might be a great thing for you. All right, we will catch you next week with some brand new episodes. We will talk to you soon. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great weekend. Bye.